Hmm. All right, all right. We are starting. It is 6:30. I hope you guys are doing great. We are live on Twitch as well. Let me add in the link for the PDFs that we are going, excuse me, the PowerPoints that we're going to be working off of tonight. We are in, since for those of you that are just joining and for those of you that are watching the video, I did not receive any questions this week with regards to any of the courses that you guys are, any of the courses that you're in. And because I did not receive any of those, we are going to continue with our prepping for the state exam reviews. So the outline that I just, or the PowerPoint or the Google Drive, if you will, that I just put in chat is the Google Drive that we are working off of. And let me stop sharing my screen for a moment so that I can reshare in just a moment. That being said, we are actually in the property ownership. We are in the property ownership's PowerPoint that is in that Google Drive, and we are on slide. So we are in the, I'm going to put it in here, property ownership PowerPoint. Slide 98 is where we are starting, or where we left off. So I'm going to add that over here. And for those of you that are watching the recording, if you have any questions or concerns, you can shoot me an email and we will be able to review that information a week from today at the same bat time, same bat place, right? Okay. For those of you that are wondering, I wonder if it's the same link for Zoom. I have set it for every Thursday for the rest of 2023, unless I can't come. And if I can't be here, then I'm sure you guys are going to have lots of fun without me. But anyway, okay, let's get into it. So we'll do a quick review or refresh. So we ended right after emblements. And then I put this little holder in there. So you might see this actually in there going, okay, why did she do that and put next week? Well, that was my own marker. It's only supposed to be on the one on my computer, but I'm really good about updating all of my files across, and all of my computers are linked in one way or shape or form. So it is possible that this is the one that's in Google Drive, but I'm feeling a very strong feeling that you do not have this note here. I'm going to leave it in there for the sake of the sake, and we are going to jump into it. So the next section we're going to be talking about is water rights. Water rights are important, and I'm going to close the screen. I've got a few different screens up. So I'm going to close the screen and move it over here. Okay. So water rights are very powerful. This image is Chateau Artisan. It's in Florida. If you've ever been to Florida, it might look beautiful, but I have a feeling it might be a very strong smell. That's a little swamp, a little too much swamp for my liking, but it's gorgeous. So it'd be great on film, maybe not necessarily in person. Visually pleasing, aesthetically pleasing, not necessarily to the nostrils. But anyway, no one has title to water. In the state of California, no one person has title to the water surrounding the properties. Okay. And you're like, okay, what does it mean, Kathy? Well, property owners whose land is next to bodies of water have a reasonable right to the use of the water, but the water is not theirs. So there is a limit on what you or anyone else can do with said water. So you're like, okay, what does that mean, Kathy? Well, technically speaking, no matter what county you live in California or abroad, but we're talking about California because this is the California Department of Real Estate prerequisite preparation for the state exam, right? So in the state of California, when it comes to water, if you live, as an example, in a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, which is the standard home across California, even though 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom seems like it's standard, but technically 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, we'll have that conversation another time. What will happen is your local water company will go, okay, so there's 3 bedrooms, so they might have 5 people living in the home. Per person, we were going to estimate that they're going to use 100 gallons a month. I don't know if that's the accurate number. This is all hypothetical. This is just explaining to you how this works. So that's your house is using 500 gallons of water a month. And then they calculate that over the county. And so they have given you that as your reasonable right of use for your home. Most of this, the property rights, moreover than not, are associated with the water rights. If you are in an agricultural area, the amount of water that you are going to consume with your family, as well as the amount that's going to be consumed by the orchards that are around you. So if you have almonds, if you have stone fruit like peach, not olives, because olives are use less water, but like peaches or nectarines or some other type of specialty fruit where a large amount of water is needed, especially right before the harvest. So that would be almonds, nectarines, peaches, and that kind of thing. There's going to be a higher use of water during that period of time, and that is technically reasonable. But in that same respect, if we're in California is always known for a drought, right? So if we're in a time of drought, you're going to find that in agricultural areas, they're going to be given a reasonable amount of water. And then because your farmland needs more water than your neighbor's farmland, it's going to be far harder for you based on the same acreage to get that, even though you have nectarines and they have olives. Olives are a stone fruit as well, but they're also not necessarily known for needing as much water. They're known for living in a drier climate, meaning that they don't have as much water and they might have additional water at the end right before harvest. So when we talk about reasonable right to water, it's not just in the suburban areas and the neighborhoods, it's also about commercial use. And ergo, no one person or no one entity has title to the water except the government. All right, so when we're talking about riparian rights, I want you to think about the rip-roaring rapids. Riparian rights allow property owners to use water from moving water, such as a river, a stream, or a creek. There should be a comma in here. Welcome to Kathy's non-grammar classes. Let me take a picture of that one. It needs to be fixed. So when we talk about riparian, we're talking about rip-roaring rapids. We're talking about moving water, rivers, streams, or creeks. But if we're talking about littoral rights, riparian rights are rip-roaring rapids, right? Littoral rights are concerning properties next to oceans, seas, or lakes rather than rivers or streams. Littoral rights are associated with the use and enjoyment of the shore. So if you look at littoral rights and you look at the people chilling like a villain in that middle image of them just sitting in the Dead Sea reading a newspaper. I don't know why they took paper into water, but ergo, I've never been to the Black Sea. Maybe they just like hand you a newspaper as you're about to go step in and float. Littoral rights, if you want to look at it, you could say, I literally need a vacation. And that's the reminder that littoral are these rights, but they're associated with oceans, seas, lakes, and rivers. They're more of that, of a scenic version of littoral rights. You have these are rights associated with the ocean, a river, a stream. It's not the same as the rip-roaring rapids, that higher moving in one direction kind of water. So an easy way to remember this is that the riparian rights have to do with water that is moving in one direction. Littoral rights have to do with water that does not have a direction. So if you go back here, again, littoral rights, if you think of water that doesn't necessarily have a direction, if you're ever on vacation with me, we are going to have no directives. We're going to be doing our thing, Probably not in the water where the shark is. It doesn't even matter if that shark's only like a foot long or a foot and a half long. We're that no touchy, no talking, no touchy. But we're not going to have a direction. We're going to have a vacation. So it's, literally need a vacation. Those are your littoral rights. Rip roar and rapids, you're going on the ride of your life. Rivers and streams, back to what it says. An easy way to remember this is riparian rights have to do with the water that is moving in one direction. Littoral rights have to do with water that does not have a direction. That doesn't mean that there isn't any water. That just, there isn't any movement. Just doesn't mean that it's going one direction or another. So if you think about an ocean, you've got high tide and low tide, right? And that's associated with the direction the water is moving. So when you think riparian, think river. When you think littoral, think lake or literally a vacation. You literally need a vacation. You can repeat this to yourself if you want, and we are going to move forward. Correlative rights or correlative use is another association with water in California. This allows a property owner the use of underground water or water from a river or irrigation. And part of the reason why for a river for irrigation is a river for irrigation, I didn't pronounce it right. The reason that there would be a river for irrigation is the water is directed into an agricultural area to fill that field with water when it is being used. But when it's not being used, there's no reason for the water to be directed that way, for the irrigation to direct it. So correlative use is correcting the direction of the water to go where it needs to. Correlative use is using it whether it's underground water or it's for irrigation purposes, it's correcting it. It's correlative. It's correcting it towards the direction it needs to go while it's there. And then it goes back to the way it was going prior. So in states where water is scarce, hello, welcome to California, the doctrine of prior appropriation determines the use of the water. According to this doctrine, this use of water is determined by the state. What state? State of California, y'all. Not the owner who is next to the body of water. So I don't know if you've ever had a neighbor or if you've ever lived in an agricultural area, but the reality of the situation is we always have one of those nosy Nellies or Karens that live next to us that lets us know exactly what we can do with our property as well as what's going to happen. They can talk all they want to, right? That's them blowing steam. The reality of the situation is the state of California is going to be the one that is over the doctrine of prior appropriation. They're going to appropriate or segregate or separate or calculate, however you want to look at it, the water that we receive. Okay, now we haven't necessarily talked about accretion or reliction. Whoops, too far, Kathy, too far. Steve McQueen in the buttons over here, guys. Accretion happens when soil is brought by the water and increases the size of your property. In this situation, I have a strong suspicion that these homeowners, when they thought that they were going to increase the size of their property, it was going to go on their property in an area that they needed, not in front of their garage or where they could not leave their home because of the land moving in this manner. But this is a very realistic visual. This is a picture of a neighborhood in California, and this is something that happened within the last 2 months. When water moves back and new land is acquired, this is called reliction. So when water moves away from the land, so as in a drought, you can go to Anderson Lake, you can go to a number of the different lakes all over California, and you can actually see where the water has recessed. It's moved back, and it hasn't technically moved back. It has dried out, right? So it's somewhere in the atmosphere over one part of the earth or another, right? Because the water just recycles. So some areas get more rain than others, etc. So the water moves back, the new land is acquired. So they say, quote unquote, new land. It just means the land that was under the water where it was previously held. And it's not a good idea to build a house there because chances are the water is coming back. It's like the Terminator. I'll be back. The water will be back. Reliction. Okay. Erosion. I think all of us have looked at the coastline and been like, it's so beautiful. But if we actually think about it, that is a very destructive visual. And the reason for that is erosion is when land or soil is worn away by wind, water, current, or ice. It's just that continual graduation, the continuation of water hitting the soil in one place or another. And you can even go into mines or different types of shafts and things where, I don't know if you guys have ever been up to Columbia, California, or other areas where you can actually go in and you can see the, what is it called, Adam, when you go into those mines and you see the stalagmite? That's not it. I can't think of what it's called. I'm losing my train of thought. But you know where you can see the rocks are forming and they drip onto the other rocks and then these mineral deposits and everything's growing up. So you can, that's another version of erosion, if you will. It's just that it's moving from one place to another, but you can see where it's wearing away of something from one part to another. So there's other erosion isn't just on the ocean. It can be in the in caverns, it could be in caves, it can be in all parts of it can even be inside the ocean in the water in and of itself where you can see erosion happening. And I think you guys have seen some of that too with different shows and stuff. If natural causes tear away land in a violent way, this is called avulsion. So a dam breaking or an earthquake is an example of avulsion. So this is Monterey County. This is north of Monterey. This is that little area in where you know that where they do the raspberries and the artichokes and different things. There was actually not a dam, but a levee broke and flooded. And this just happened within the last few months as well. So this is avulsion is something that can happen, whether it's a dam, whether it's a levee, whether it's another area where water was held back, even if it was a natural source of water or a natural dam, not something that maybe man-made that we've made. These kind of things, avulsion happens. It's human nature, or not human nature, it's just mother nature, right? Or something along those lines. So that is it. Let's jump over to estates, and we're going to talk a little bit about estates, and we're going to look and then again we're going to go into it a little bit deeper dive, but we're just going to brush through a little bit of it right now. So when we talk about property ownership and estates, we're talking about freehold, and then we're also talking about less than freehold. If you have a freehold estate, you've got a freehold estate. If you have a less than freehold estate, that means you literally have less than a freehold estate, and we'll go into it. A freehold estate is an estate where you have exclusive right to enjoy the possession of a property for an indefinite period of time, meaning there's no period of time on it. If you go see Taylor Swift, you've got a ticket to go see her. And on that ticket, it tells you when the concert starts. And it also tells you when there's like details on that. You have the right to be there for a minute, right? Or for a few minutes, a lot of minutes. But when it's all said and done, there is a definite period of time this is over. So a freehold estate is an estate where you have exclusive right to enjoy the possession of a property for an indefinite period of time is a little bit of the opposite, whereas there's no definite time. In contrast, a less than freehold estate is for a fixed defined period. The three types of freehold estates that come up on the real estate exam are fee simple absolute, which is the bomb diggity, the one that you buy that property and you don't owe nobody nothing. But I do have a degree in English, just hear me out. A fee simple defeasible, it's got something going with it. And a life estate is you get to live your best life there, either on your life or someone else's life, and then you've got to go. And we'll talk about each of those next. Okay, so fee simple absolute is pretty much your standard. I just said that. We have it again. Well, it's repetitious. That's okay. Repetition equals retention. And the thing is, the more times you do something, it isn't perfection, it's a habit. So I'm totally down with us having more than one slide say the exact same thing. A fee simple or a fee simple absolute is in a state in land, meaning that we have an estate in land. This type of ownership cannot be claimed by a previous owner or the previous owner's heirs. However, it is not free from encumbrances. What are encumbrances, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody above and beyond? Well, something that could encumber the property. It could be the neighbor's tree growing over the top, or it could be a financial encumbrance. And we'll talk about that as time progresses, okay? Fee simple absolute is the greatest interest in a parcel of land that you could possibly own. You own it. So you've got this, you own this, you have you have full interest in that property. You have full rights to that property. So it's fee simple. There's no details. You don't have to detail anything to it. And it's absolute, meaning nobody can come in and go, oh, my bad, that's my estate, and on the life of somebody else that kicked the bucket. Now it comes back to me. It's not reverting back to anyone. Fee simple absolute means you own the estate, period, end, final answer. Do not pass go. Actually, you can pass go and get $200. This is one of the only times I'll even say that. So sometimes it is called fee. It's simply just called fee. The fee simple ownership is absolute ownership of real property and is the only limited by 4 basic concerns. And what would that be? The government. So it's got powers of taxation, eminent domain, police power, and estate. Now we know that estate or estate, however you want to pronounce it, is when the government comes in, and some people that teach these classes say the government cheated somebody out of their property. But the reality of the situation is estate or estate looks like the government's cheating by taking someone's property after they die. But if they die intestate, meaning that they die without a will, the government has no choice, or the power that be, so it'd be your local county or your local city ordinances, have no choice but to take possession of the property to technically protect the neighborhood. And for those of you that are like, they're not protecting the neighborhood. No, I hear you. But the reality of the situation is they take that property and make sure that when an heir does come up out of the woodwork, because they usually do, that it will be resolved. But if it doesn't get resolved within a few years, that's a totally different conversation for another day, but we're going to get to that. We'll come back to estate, okay, or estate, however you want to pronounce it. Properties can also be encumbered be limited by some encumbrances or a condition in a deed. So there are some memory techniques to remember. The word absolute means complete and unrestricted. So if you have fee simple absolute, which Adam and I have fee simple absolute on this property, there's no restrictions. We can do all of the things that are in the bundle of rights and live our best lives with our little fur baby, wherever she's taken her 5th or 10th nap of the day. We can have our friends over and have a barbecue. We can wear pink in class. If you're ever in class with me, I always talk about how there's some type of a restriction that people can't wear pink. I've used that in different business classes. It seems like an odd thing to say, but it's a very intrusive color. If you ever saw Legally Blonde, any of those, it's a very intense color. So you can wear pink anytime you come and visit, but I'm just saying. Okay, so fee simple defeasible. So a defeasible estate is created when a grantor puts a condition on a fee simple estate in the deed. And it's not like, I'm telling you this, it has to be in writing. What? To hold up in a court of law. In the state of California, we do not have oral conversations. It's not on a wink and a prayer. It's not on a spit and a shake. None of that stuff. You don't. When my dad was a kid, they used to spit on their hands and shake hands, and that was their like, we have an agreement. Well, no, not today, and not for the last however many years. Contractual law in the state of California must be in writing. So this means, so let's go back to the defeasible estate. This is created by a grantor putting a condition on a fee simple estate. This means that if a particular event happens, the estate could be lost. Ergo, I'm giving you a fee, I'm giving you a defeasible estate or a deed with that's a defeasible estate. You can't wear pink on my property. The moment you do, it comes back to me because you wore pink and you shouldn't, or something along those lines. It's more aggressive than that, a lot more it's in a lot more of an association with bias and racism and some of these other things. There are also some financial situations where a grandparent may grant a property, or not grant, but deed a property to a grandchild. Ergo, the only way you can live here is if you do the following, which is go to school and get a degree or something along those lines. There's other stuff like that. Okay, so there's 2 types of defeasible estates. There's the fee simple determinable, and then there's the fee simple subject to a condition subsequent. And for those of you that have already taken the classes with me that we talked about the lawsuits involved in property, that subject to a condition subsequent is one of the ones that comes up where a family donated a piece of property to the city for a library 3 generations back. And it was a fee simple subject to condition subsequent. So the condition subsequent was that property always have a library on it. And the moment 3 generations later that the city took the last library book out of the building, the family, the 3rd generation from the family, the 3rd generation since the family that donated the property, and what I mean by donated is they deeded the property as a fee simple subject to conditions subsequent, went to court and sued and said, we get the property back because there's no library there. Ergo, that condition subsequent, or that subject to condition subsequent, the moment they took that last book out, now it's not a library, our family gets the property back. Now, did the family build the building that the library was in and all the other city buildings that were on that property? No, but that's not the problem. The problem is the city did have a fee simple subject condition subsequent. And because of that, the city was in a precarious position, and it actually had to it went through a couple different court, it just kept going up the line of court. And we're going to be talking about how court hearings are held and how you can go, yeah, we're going to go higher. And the truth of the matter is, precedent on previous court hearings that have been set is what presents an answer for what can happen now. So a good attorney is going to say, well, Your Honor, Smith versus Smith in 1972 had yada yada. So there's already precedent set by let's say the superior court, so a higher court than And so in these kind of situations, we're going to have these a little bit more deep dive. So for those of you that are like, okay, wait a minute, I'm so confused. A fee simple determinable and a fee simple subject to conditions subsequent. So you don't own the property. No, you own the property, but in order to keep the property, you must follow the notes in the deed. And the deed states this property has been deeded to you subject to. And for those of you that are like, how would we know? It would be in the deed. And we don't have anything on our deed. Our deed is just a fee simple absolute, which means we own it, and nobody can come back and say you wore pink on that property or any of that other stuff, right? So this being said, the standard home is fee simple absolute. The reason you need to know and recognize the fee simple determinable and the fee simple subject to a condition subsequent is if a client comes to you and they're wanting you to help them sell their home, and you look at the deed and it looks a little squirrely, and you're like, wait a minute. You're all, hey, Google, what does blah, blah, blah mean? She didn't hear me. I immediately, hey, Google, stop. She did hear me in the kitchen. That's funny. I'm going to have to use a different name, but I think you guys know what the H to the G, something like that. I'll say something like that, but you'll be able to recognize there's one of these is not like the other. Okay. You'll notice. That's why you're learning about this. Also, because a little bit of this information is on the state exam, but it's foundational for you to understand. So let's look at an example. The grantor may state a specific duration such as, so who's the grantor? The person giving you the property may have a stipulation in the deed that says, I grant this to Adam as long as the land is used for a park. If or when the specified event happens, the estate will automatically end and go back to the grantor or the grantor's estate. This is called a fee simple determinable. So if or when the specified event happens, so he can keep it as long as there's a park there, but the moment he doesn't have a park there, and the deed doesn't say just a park, and if he were to put a tree and name the tree park, and everything was fine and he built a mansion there, that's not really how this works. Although those of you that are thinking about that, I like the way you think, but loopholes are meant to be filled, and that's why we have more chapters in the books than we had previously, because there's these loopholes. Well, what about this, Your Honor, that, Your Honor, So anyway, if the property is granted to Adam for the use of a park, and then Adam decides not to have a park and he decides to turn it into a mini golf property or something along those lines, that is a foundation for having the property given back to the grantor. A grantor may state in a specific that there's a specific condition in the deed, such as no alcohol to be served on said property. This would be a condition subsequent. You could lose your title if you serve alcohol on your property. And yeah, for those of you that are like, what about self-serve? It's still being served. So alcohol being on the ergo, when it says no alcohol being served on the property, it literally means that it needs to be a dry property. So if you think of most of Utah, it's a dry state, right? So in that same respect, you're technically doing like a little Utah kind of thing here, where it would make the property a dry a dry property, no alcohol, no non-consuming, non-alcoholic beverage consummation is the only way it's going to go in this place. So that's a lot of information. Let's let that marinate like a good piece of meat and barbecue later. Okay, we're going to marinate, we're going to let it set, and then we're going to come back, because one thing you'll find in these books, and one thing you'll find about prepping for the state exam, is it's always full circle. It's a little, the preparation for the state exam is a little village, and we're going to be visiting every street, every nook, every cranny, and every store. Okay. So life estate, a life estate is an interest in real estate which lasts the duration of one person's lifetime. So this may be the lifetime of the person holding the estate, meaning living their best life there, or it may be a lifetime of another person. And you're like, wait, who? Don't worry. We got pictures here. See, we got pictures. I got all kinds of cool stuff over here. Okay, so let's go back. Life estate. And so this is an example. Can give a property to Dan for the life of Anne. And you're like, wait a minute, what is that? So let me put it this way. I can give this, well, Adam and I have this property together. Let's say we didn't. Let's say that I had this property. I can give this property to Adam for my life, and Dan would be the life tenant. So I'm like, hey, Adam, this is your property, and here's the deed, and you are the life tenant. The life tenant would receive the property and is responsible for the maintenance of the property and paying the taxes. If a life tenant allows a property to deteriorate, however, so if Adam is like, we're going to be gaming 24/7 for the next 20 years and isn't making sure that the roof is on the property properly, and there's plumbing issues and different things like that, which isn't something he would do, that's considered committing waste. So when we, and you're like, why are we going here, Kathy? This is a loophole. We're not a loophole. This is a screwball. We're like throwing the ball at you from a different angle. But life estate examples are a little screwy loose. So I want you to come in here and understand that we're going to be going this direction with a certain, with a few things. So we're going to be talking about life estates, meaning on my life, he gets to live here, but he lives here. He has that bundle of rights. He has the right to do all the things except sell the property, because he has a life. He's the life tenant. So for my life, he can live here, but he has to pay the taxes, and he has to make sure that the home stays in, what is it called? He has to make sure that the house is habitable, but it's got to be for human habitation, not wildlife or animals. Or college students. I've seen some of your houses. I've seen some of the dorms. I'm just teasing. All right. So let me try to water it down a little bit further. We're going to use some visuals. So if we talk about these life estates, we talk about a life tenant, we talk about the who gets to live in the property. Let's talk about a situation where Amy grants Bob a property. It's almost the exact same thing as Anne and Dan. The difference is it's not on the life of Anne. This one is talking about the life of Anne. Technically, it's on the life of Bob. So Amy grants Bob a life estate. So this is an estate in reversion. Amy grants Bob a life estate with the provision that upon Bob's death, the property reverts to Amy. So Amy says to Bob, hey, you can live here and you can pay the property taxes and you can maintain it, but you don't have to do anything else. There's no mortgage. You just have to make sure the property taxes and maintain the home. Upon your death, however, the property will revert back to me. What does that mean? Well, Bob's heirs are not going to get the property because he doesn't own the property. He has been deeded a life estate. So for his life, he gets to be the life tenant on said property, but upon his death, it reverts back to Amy. Bob has this life tenant, or he's a life tenant, or he's got the life tenancy. He also has the life estate. It's upon his life. So Bob is then the life tenant and is designated party to whom the life estate is based. Amy holds an estate in reversion, and we're going to answer a question together. What does it mean in reversion? Like old school VHS tapes used to be rewound and taken back to the videotape rental company. I'm definitely telling you how old I am. That is rewinding it, getting it back to where it needs to go. So it's reverted back. It reverts back to Amy. It goes back to Amy. So for example, if Bob dies, the property does go to Amy, and Amy would have that estate in reversion. Bob's children or his heirs. They don't have to be his kids. They can be anybody's kid. They can be anybody's, right? We know that Betty White gave money to a number of nonprofits and animals. We've talked about other famous people who have passed and they've left their estates to their animals. Whoever the heirs are that Bob would like to give the property to, he can't because he has a life estate. So he almost has all the bundle rights, but he does not have the complete package. That being said, let's answer a question together. John conveys a portion of his fee estate to Fred. Notice it says right here, John conveys a portion of his fee estate to Fred. That is for a term less than his own. Right here, we immediately know he has conveyed a property or he has deeded his property to Fred, but not the whole thing, a portion. So if John has a pizza and he's given half of his pizza to Fred, Fred doesn't have the whole pizza. So John conveys a portion of his fee estate to Fred that is for a term less than his own, meaning it's a determinable time. John owns interests. John's own interest would be what? So now that he has given a portion of his fee estate to Fred, what interest would John have? Well, is he the remainder? Is he in reversion? Is he invested sufferance? And the one thing you'll find about sufferance is that's a situation where somebody didn't do right by the other, right? And or is it fee defeasible? Have we just recently talked about fee defeasible? What did we just recently talk about? Have we talked about remainder? Have we talked about reversion? Have we talked about sufferance, or have we talked about fee defeasible? Well, we've talked about one of the R words. It's either remainder or reversion, right? So let's see what the answer is. The rights of possession and use would return to John, so John has a reversionary interest. Good job. Awesome. Good job. Has a reversionary interest. A remainder interest would be one that goes to a third party. And the reason this is important is if you talk about reversionary, let's go back for just a moment. Amy gave the property to Bob, but once he dies, it goes in reverse. Reversionary. If it's just between Bob and Amy, Amy's the grantor, Bob is the life tenant. It goes in reverse. It's reversionary. So when we look here, John conveys a portion of his fee estate to Fred that is for a term less than his own. If this question had anybody else in the conversation, we would know it was more than just reversing back to John. John's own interest would be reversion. He's waiting for it to come back. He's waiting for Fred's time, the allotted time for Fred to be on God's green earth. The allotted time to hang up has been exceeded. Please hang up. Or wait, the allotted time to dial has been exceeded. Please hang up and dial again. So Fred, once he kicks the bucket, if you will, it would reverse back or rewind back. Reverse is a better word for reversion. Reverse back to John in the same way that Amy granted the property to Bob for his life. And when he died, it reversed back to her. That reversion reversed back to her. Okay. I think I got it. I think we got it. Okay, so reserving a life estate. So we have an elderly couple and a developer. And you're like, this developer sounds questionable. No, actually, that developer is brilliant if they can just sit on the money. So an elderly couple, so this is reserving a life estate. So an elderly couple sells their property to developer, reserving the right to live on that property until their death. Then at that point, it should say death period. At that point, the developer is going to be able to take possession of the property. This is called reserving a life estate. The developer's like, I'm going to buy this property from you in 2023, and I'm going to reserve the right to develop this in the future. In the same way, we call a really good restaurant, and I mean, a really good restaurant. Sometimes you got a few weeks, sometimes you got a few months. You're like, oh, yeah, hi, this is Kathy. Yeah, Kathy Kahn. I would like to reserve a restaurant. Oh, Kathy, we can have it this week. Nay, I want to be treated like the people. And then, I have to wait 6 weeks or whatever to get into the restaurant. And I'm being sarcastic when I say stuff like that. I am like everybody else. All right. So reserving a life estate is like reserving a restaurant for the future, right? Reserving a life estate is a family or an elderly couple that sold their property to a developer. And the developer's like, I'll buy it from you now. You can just sit there and live whatever's left of your best life. And that sounds harsh, but hello. And then when they both people either pass, or if maybe one passes and the other is elderly enough that they can't take care of themselves and the property, and they can no longer live on the property, at that point as well, the developer's like, okay, let me take care of this and we'll move in and take care of business. I had a student about 2 years ago, hilarious, the funniest guy, very dry, very sarcastic. His name was Raymond. It's still Raymond, investor. And he came into the classes and I was like, Raymond, and he would like send me information, like, tell the students about this. And I'm like, Raymond, are you an agent? And you're just like hanging. He's like, no, I'm an investor. And I just wanted to make sure that the broker that I'm paying to help me with all of my contractual agreements is actually doing their job. And when it was all said and done, he was really happy to say that the broker that he had been working with was actually doing their job and that he actually was paying them for their services. He's like, oh, now I see what they're doing. Okay. But anyway, and he's not the only student I've ever had that comes in as an investor to see what the agents are supposed to be doing. And that's a scary thing because that lets you know there's a bunch of agents out there that are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Because I've had a number of other students come in and go, yeah, I need a better broker. I'm like, oh, okay. Hope you find that. I don't know what I can do. No, I'm just kidding. I could help them too, right? But okay. That's our 2-second break, our 2-minute break. So we know this elderly couple reserving a live estate means you're reserving the restaurant for later, or the developer is reserving or is allowing the property to be reserved and lived in by that elderly couple until they pass so he can develop it. She or they can develop it at a later time. PrepAgent. I will talk about PrepAgent all day, every day, because Tom over here, Tom has got a family in a couple other countries. He's got a couple different baby mamas. Like this dude, he is up to something. And for those of you in my classes, you know that I really have a thing for, I don't have a thing for Tom. I have a thing knowing he's got some dirty secrets, this guy. So anyway, that being said, PrepAgent. Tom grants a life estate to Susan, this really sweet lady, this really nice, sweet smile, this lady right here. Susan is the life tenant for the life of Elizabeth, this one right here, with the provision that it goes to Laura up here. I don't know why I'm making that noise. When Elizabeth dies. So Susan, this one right here, beautiful, may enjoy the benefit of the life estate as long as Elizabeth, this one down here, is alive. So PrepAgent, Tom's like, hey, Susan, you can live here as long as Elizabeth is still on God's green earth. And oh, by the way, Laura, if you can outlive Elizabeth, you get the property. So basically Laura's in limbo. She's holding on. She's not holding on to nothing, but she knows that in the future, either her or her heirs are going to receive this property. She's not really holding her breath because Elizabeth's at least 20 years younger than everybody on the top shelf up here. That being said, Susan gets to live in this property and she kind of is keeping tabs, making sure that Elizabeth's taking care of herself. So when she's on the phone with Elizabeth, even if, I don't know if they really know each other, guys, I have my own story for these people. So she's like, hey, Elizabeth, what are you doing? She's like, oh, we're going to go help out people in the rainforest, and we're going to stop this, and then we're going to go skydiving, and then and Susan's like, hey, Elizabeth, why don't you guys just go to Knott's Berry Farm and just chillax and for at least the next 30 years. So Susan is going to want only the best for Elizabeth. We should all want the best for Elizabeth, but Susan gets to live in this property while Elizabeth is alive. That's where I'm going with this. But while Susan lives here, she still has the responsibilities as if she owns the property. She has the bundle of rights minus the right to sell. She can do all of the other things associated with the property. So Susan, the life tenant, cannot leave the property to someone in her will or in their will, depending on if she doesn't want to be known as her. She can't go, oh, hey guys, this is my property. And so no, it's technically she's the life tenant, meaning I can be here on the life of Elizabeth. I get to live my best life here on the life of Elizabeth. A life tenant may mortgage or even lease a property for the duration of the estate. What do you mean by lease the property? Well, she could go, you know what? Elizabeth's living her best life. Laura's living her best life. We know Tom has been living his best life. I'm going to lease the property to somebody else. I'm going to go travel the world. She has the rights to everything involved with that property, even if it was an income producing property, as long as Elizabeth is still living. The kicker is any contracts would end upon the death of the life tenant. So let's say Susan, let's say, because Tom, you know, Tom's bougie, right? So I mean, he just kind of gives off those vibes. He's probably a really nice man. Anyway, it's a pixelated image. So he reminds me of Dynasty circa 1980, whatever that was. I didn't get to watch that show when I was a kid because it came on late. My parents said it was an inappropriate evening soap opera. But anyway, I digress. So Tom, let's say this is a beautiful, like 15,000 square foot estate in Santa Monica that he has allowed Susan to be the life tenant. He's put her in as life tenant for the life of Elizabeth. Well, Susan is looking at the property taxes on this property as well as her income and some other things. And she's like, you know what? I'd rather lease this property out to one of the groups of housewives of whatever county, and they can do all the things they want to do on that property. But unfortunately, something happens and there is a passing of the life tenant. That contract, even though it would be with Bravo or whomever, I don't know if it's Bravo or Life Channel or the Hallmark Channel, I don't know who those, anyway, HGTV, whoever they are, that contract would be canceled. So chances are companies, big companies like that would not just get that lease option with Susan, but they would also probably reach out to Laura knowing that she is waiting. She's in remainder. She's in a holding pattern, limbo, if you will, and be like, hey, can we finish out the season and the property or whatever? They would probably communicate with her because they know contracts, right? All these reality shows, they know contracts. That's one thing they do know. So if Elizabeth dies during this whole process, then the property would not be Susan's. And I think we already clarified that, but it's good for it to be writing because it had, well, technically Susan only had the property while Elizabeth was alive. So on Elizabeth's death, the property would go to Laura, and then Laura would have the estate in remainder. She's in remainder. She's remaining to the side, waiting for the property to become hers or given to her heirs. So an estate in remainder, here's another example. So we were just talking about per atra v in detail just now, right? Per atra v is where Tom is like, hey, Susan, you can leave her on Elizabeth's life. And when she passes, Laura, the property's yours or your heirs. So Laura is in a state of remainder. She's standing in remainder. Once she receives the property, she has an estate for remainder, an estate in remainder. But she has the whole kit and caboodle. She doesn't have to do anything for any other people because everybody else has already lived their best lives, right? Okay. So here's another example of estate in remainder. Instead of keeping a reversionary interest, the grantor, a little bit like per atra v that we just talked about, the grantor can instead identify someone to receive the property when the life tenant dies. So in that same respect, over here, we have Tommy Two-Tone, that has said, Susan, you live here on the life of Elizabeth, but I don't want the property back. You guys just give it to Laura once once everybody kicks the bucket, right? So in the same respect, we've got Greg, who deeds a life estate to Linda, and upon her death, Charles gets it. He's remaining to the side, or he's in limbo, or he's in a position waiting. He's the remainderman. So let's read what the card says. Instead of keeping a reversionary interest, the grantor can instead identify someone to receive the property when the life tenant dies. Who's the life tenant in this example? Linda. Linda looks like a really sweet lady. That interest is known as a remainder, and the person identified in the instrument creating the interest is known as the remainderman. So Charles, or Charlie, at the youngest one in this group, is the remainderman. He's in holding or remaining and wait, not because he wants Linda to pass, but there's an understanding that once she does, the property's his. A remainder is a future interest that takes effect upon the expiration of the life estate when the life tenant dies in this example. So in this example, when Linda passes, Charlie gets the property. So it's future interest. Charlie has the future interest in this estate in remainder, and Laura has the future interest in per atra v. In the same way that Amy, she has it reversed back to her, but it'll come back to her. And that's in the same way it comes back to Amy. But because there's more than two people involved, we don't have the developer one. You guys got that one. Like, I know you guys got that one. Okay. So in the same way, per atra v. So per atra v and estate and remainder both have a remainderman is where I'm going with this. Okay. So the remainder is the future. interest that takes effect upon the expiration of the life estate when the live tenant dies. So Greg grants a life estate to Linda with the provision that upon Linda's kicking of said bucket, the property goes to the third party, who is Charlie. The interest that Charles holds is known as estate and remainder. Okay, so we just talked about per atra v. We just talked about an estate and remainder. We just talked about a life estate. We just talked about a lot of estates, right? So let's talk about a less than freehold estate now. In contrast to all the information about a freehold estate, a less than freehold estate is for a fixed defined period. And you're like, Kathy, less than freehold estate is such a weird way of saying whatever you're saying. So what are you saying? Well, hold your horses, y'all. We are going to talk about less than freehold estates now, okay? So less than freehold estates. So a less than freehold estate is an estate held by someone who rents or leases property. So when it says less than freehold estate, it's less than an estate. It means you have the rights to a property you don't own. You're renting or you're leasing, okay? So the key element of a less than freehold estate is the limitation of time. It's closing time, you know, it's that kind of the song. I don't know if you guys know the song. I'm definitely dating myself. Okay. A less than freehold estate can be an estate for years, a periodic tenancy, an estate at will, which in itself is complicated. That estate and will, you're going to look at it and go, this doesn't make that much sense. It's okay, we'll figure it out. Or an estate of sufferance. If you ever see the word sufferance, it means somebody's in breach of contract. Or that's not technically the accurate thing. That's not the way you say it. An estate in sufferance isn't that you have breached a contract. It's the fact that the contract is up and you stop taking phone calls from the landlord. You're just living your best life on the property after the contract is void. So sufferance is after a contract's already been gone through and nothing has been renegotiated. So sufferance is the owner suffering because y'all are sitting in that property and not doing nothing. My mom would beat me if she knew. She wouldn't beat me, but she would be like, Kathy, English degree? Yes. Business degree? Yes. PhD in education? Almost. Y'all don't know nothing. That's okay. I'm going to keep saying it. Just kidding. Okay, let's go back. I must be tired. How late is it? Oh, we're going to do 10 more minutes for those of you that can stay. For those of you that can't, it will be closing time and you can't stay here. Less than freehold estate. So a less than freehold estate, we already said this, estate for years, periodic tenancy, estate at will, which in and of itself is its own explanation. I already said it. I know repetition equals retention. For those of you that are like, she's saying it again. I know, I do it a lot. And estate of sufferance, we'll talk about those. So an estate for years is a leasehold interest in land for a fixed period of time. And it is often called a tenancy for years. For those of you that have ever signed a lease agreement for a rental property, either for commercial or for like a residence. Rarely do I ever hear anyone say, oh, I signed an estate for years. Most people say, I signed a lease. I have a rental agreement. I just signed my life away for a year. I hope I keep that job, or I hope they keep me, you know, that kind of thing. Example. So you might find an estate for years is a summer rental. So maybe an Airbnb or something along those lines. Again, I still don't ever hear anybody use the words estate for years, but Kathy can argue with you. I'm going to pull a Bob Dole. Kathy can argue with you over the fact that people don't say estate for years, or I can encourage you to understand that contractually speaking, this is a term and a definition that you're going to need to know for the state exam, but not necessarily in your field of expertise. So an estate for years is an example of a summer rental because it has a definite beginning and a definite end. So you might, as an example, rent a home in Santa Monica. Santa Monica seems to be on my mind today and this week. For the month of July and all the way to the second week of August. So that would be a beginning and an end date. That would be an estate for years. And you're like, but Kathy, but it's not 4 years. I know, term and definition, please note it. Periodic tenancy is also known, and this could be confusing, as an estate from years to years or from year to year. Sometimes the S's aren't in there. It is a tenancy that is not bound by a lease with a fixed period. That's what an estate for years is. This is an estate from years to years. So a periodic tenancy follows a period such as month to month, week to week, or year to year. This is another clinical explanation of the term and definition. A periodic tenancy is what I closely relate to a rental agreement. You have a periodic tenancy. It's for month to month. So you might find that you will sign a lease for 6 months or a year where you're stuck with that property for that period of time. And then it goes and rolls into a month to month rental agreement where either you or your landlord can give you a 30 or a 60-day notice. So if there is an estate at sufferance, and I don't know how many of you have ever woken up on a brisk, cool morning and you're making your espresso in your espresso machine, or your pour over coffee or Mr. KitchenAid, whatever thing, and you go to get the cream out of the fridge and it has separated. But to me, that is my estate in sufferance. But that is not an estate in sufferance per the state of California. So an estate in sufferance happens when a tenant wrongfully holds onto a property after their lease has ended. This is often called a tenancy at sufferance. So when we talk about a tenancy in sufferance, meaning the contract between the landlord and the tenant has expired, a lot like the cream in my fridge. It has expired. It is no longer any good. That doesn't mean the people aren't good. The people are great. People are just totally misunderstanding each other and have to get a new contract signed. But while they are out of contract, that old contract has expired, like the milk. Now it's a tenancy at sufferance because people are living in a property and pretending like they have some type of contractual agreement without actually having that contractual agreement, which is termed tenancy at sufferance or an estate in sufferance. So an example would be, had a lease or a rental agreement that ended yesterday. So today, as an example, is May 25th. If we had a lease agreement or a rental agreement and the last day of said agreement said May 24th, and I stopped taking phone calls from you and stopped trying to negotiate a new contract, and you walk and come to the door and realize that I've changed the locks and all the other things, I'm no longer in contract. I'm now squatting on your property. It's a tenancy in sufferance because at one point in time, we actually had a legitimate contract. So again, it's a term and it's a definition. When I think of a sufferance, I think of morning suffering without cream in my coffee. So you can deem it however you want to, but estate in sufferance or tenancy at sufferance is talking about having an agreement and the agreement no longer being it's expired. It's no longer a valid contract. You can't go, well, we'll just stick with the one we had. Well, that now we have to write a new one. An example of an estate in sufferance would be a tenant that does not pay rent. And you're like, Kathy, repetition. I know repetition equals retention, and we can keep the habit going. So in simple terms, the landlord is what is known as suffering. This is not a form of trespass, because at one point the tenant did have the right to be on the property, but technically speaking, at this point, they no longer have the right to be on the property, ergo it is trespassing, ergo it is squatting. The landlord would now have the legal right to evict the tenant in this situation. Now, if the tenant goes, I'm going to take you to court, I'm suing you, and they go to court and they're like, Your Honor, you don't understand. Like, he told me that I made him suffer, and then the judge is all, it's paper driven, it's law driven, right? Contractual law driven. The court, who is the judge, because you can say the court will review this and go, okay, so you had a contract as of the 24th of May, and now it's the 25th. I don't know how we got into court so quickly because it's due process takes a minute, but anyway. And you're still living in the house and you're not paying rent. Oh, we'll eventually get to rent. No. You're right here. It showed you always paid on the 25th. So did you pay for this month? You know what I mean? The court is going to, the judge is going to look at it and go, the law, and this is you proving this whole entire time you've been paying the rent on time and you've been following everything you were supposed to this whole entire time. And then all of a sudden you're not in contract anymore. Like, I don't have to follow the law. I don't have to follow. The judge is going to look at past behavior and go, get out. The sheriff will meet you at the property and you will be helped, encouraged physically to move. It might not happen that quickly, but that's basically the kit and the caboodle. Okay. All right, so let's talk about an estate at will. And I don't think we necessarily really touch on this in your 3 prerequisite books. And part of the reason why I've got to be careful I don't give myself a raccoon eyes. Sorry, guys, I started scratching my eyes. So estate at will, and estate at will means that it can be ended at any time, but this is something that is an agreement between the parties. So it all depends on the will of both parties. So let's say I'm your landlord and you're the tenant, and I'm like, you kind of need to go. And you're like, I kind of don't want to. And I'm like, but you kind of have to. It's the will of both parties. We have to come to an agreement. So an estate at will gives the lessee the right to possession until the estate is terminated by either party. The term of this estate is indefinite. This is not allowed in many states. So when we talk about this estate, this is an agreement between the two parties. If we can't come to an agreement, it'll go before the judge again, and the court will decide. The judge is the court or jury will decide whether or not we have an estate at will. But technically you're supposed to be in agreement. So it's a bit confusing. So again, I want you to understand from the clinical perspective, the term and definition for the state exam more than anything else at this point. Okay. So the term of this estate is indefinite. So an estate at will is indefinite. And let's jump over. We've already talked about leases, right? You're not owning it. If you're leasing it from someone else, but you could have a lease option. You could have a lease option to buy. So there could be something associated with that lease. When we're the landlord and our clients are leasing the property from us, we've given them all of the bundle of rights. They get to live their best life. They get to let people in. They get to keep people out. They get to do all the things except to sell the property. They cannot dispose of the property. So when they're leasing the property from us, they technically are doing all the things we would have done if we lived on the property. And one of the things they get to do is not allow us in the property, and we will have to present in writing to them a 24-hour notice or something else unless there's an emergency. But that's like standard practice, right? So when it comes to a lease, even though someone's leasing a property from us, that doesn't mean we can just go walk into their house and drink their milk or take their milk because our milk is expired, or barbecue in their backyard. They own the property as if their rights, or that those lease rights to the property are as if they own the property. So a lease, so in a lease, we're not talking about lease. In a lease, the landlord is the lessor and the tenant is the lessee. So in these kind of situations, any of the ors and the e's that we're going to be talking about, when I say or, I mean or, and when I say e, I mean double e. When we talk about those, we're going to do this at the end of this preparation. We're going to talk about the differences between them. Adam always talks to me about how you have an employer and you have an employee. So the person in that position of authority is the or, and the person that is subservient, or the person that is taking direction, is the E. So we'll come back to lease. Okay. I don't want to keep you for more than an hour. We are on slide 140. Let me note it with my lipstick pencil. Pen. It's a lipstick pencil. I mean pen. So we are on slide 140, and this was our Thursday night class. And we will come back to this, but as a side note, ladies and gents, and everybody above and beyond, we will, let's go back in here to the drive. Before we go, Kokomo, we are going to look at our, oh, I went too far. Let's look at our Google Drive together so that you are prepared. And if you want to surpass me, you can. Exam prep 2023. I will put this in here and I will put it into the Cadillac. Somebody's painting in my house. It's taking a minute to get stuff in. So you'll see PowerPoints. This is what we were just working off of. We're only on property ownership. We have a government PowerPoint, we have easements PowerPoint, and we have agency as well. You'll be able to go in and pull those up and review them. Okay. That will give you the opportunity to do that. I am an email away. I am a Google Voice phone call or text message away. 732-723-7326. And this will be up on the YouTubes as of tomorrow. If, however, you're like, I can't wait till tomorrow, We always have them recorded on Twitch until they fall off. I do not do anything with the Twitch account other than a let it go live stream. If you have any friends or family that are interested in getting into real estate and they would like to experience this in real time, you can definitely send them over. We're going to be doing 6:30 on all Thursdays for the rest of 2023. And it'll always be on Twitch, but it won't necessarily always be on this Zoom link that you have today, but I hope it will. And that being said, if you have any questions or concerns, let me know. And if you don't, it is 7:32. You may go. And I will see you in the next class. All right. Well, that was fun. Okay, guys. Be blessed, be encouraged. If you need anything, you know how to reach me. And if you don't know how to reach me, put a comment on the YouTubes or on the Twitches and or I think you have to whisper on Twitch actually. Yeah, because I don't read the comments during class on that. But anyway, that being said, it was wonderful. I know you can do this. I believe in you. And I will see you soon. Bye, 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 bye. She usually comes in and says bye too. I was waiting for Miss. She's coming. Come here. What do we say? We say bye-bye. Oh, 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 oh. I'm sorry. Okay, what do we say? We say bye-bye. Do you want to say something? Do you want to tell them what we did today? Nothing? Yeah, we did nothing. Okay. Have a wonderful day.